All right. Hey, everybody. Today we have an amazing video for you guys. We have an incredible guest, Mr. Adam Sud. I can't believe we haven't had him on before. He's had one of the biggest transformations I think I've ever seen in my entire life. I will try pop a picture of him up on the screen right now. He's lost about 200 pounds. He lives a whole foods healthy diet and he reversed diabetes. He knows so many things. I think he's a behavior and nutrition specialist. We will hop into it, see what happened. This one's going to be so good. Stick around till the end. Hey, Adam, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing? I'm also like you just said, I can't believe we have not done this already. But I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Me too. This is going to be amazing. So you know so much too. So there's so much you can help us with. And I just think the topic of diabetes alone is such a big topic these days. I think so many people are
Wow.
walking around with issues and they have no idea. So I love touching on this. And let's get to know you a little bit more for people who don't
Sure.
and talk a bit about your story. You used to weigh like, I think 200 pounds more. You used to be very depressed. I even saw some pictures where like your environment was like fast food everywhere. You didn't want to get out of bed, like really extreme opposite 180 you've done now, right?
Yeah, I weighed nearly 350 pounds at one point. And you know, I it's interesting because I got into that place in this kind of slight, subtle, almost imperceptible shift that was occurring over the course of time until eventually I woke up and I was in the worst place I'd ever been. I had no idea how I got there. I was ashamed that I didn't know how it got that bad. And I was ashamed to tell people that I didn't know how it got that bad and that, that prevented me from asking for help. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in I'm like a sixth or seventh generation Texan, right? So I grew up with burgers and barbecue, and I'm also Jewish, so I grew up with bagels and blintzes, right? It's like the standard American diet, wearing cowboy boots with chutzpah. And I had an amazing childhood where I lived in a neighborhood where my friends and I we rode our bikes to and from school. My dad was really involved with my brother and I and my younger sister in terms of like sports. My dad taught me how to play every sport. My mom was really passionate about inspiring my imagination. But even though I had all those wonderful things going on,
Hmm.
I had a very hypercritical household. By the time I was about 10 years old, I would come running in from outside, playing in the sprinklers in the summer in Texas in like 1992, which is what you did in my neighborhood. And my dad would criticize my love handles at age 10. And,
Wow.
you know, I kind of remember this feeling before of having this sense that, I had a relationship with myself physically and emotionally that I was excited to show up and be present for every single day. And I
Hmm.
felt good in myself and I felt free and safe. And as these criticisms kept getting applied to me, all of a sudden it felt like, hang on a second, my body may not be such a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be. In fact, there may be conditions upon which I need to meet in order to be loved by the people who matter the most to me. And that scared the living daylights out of me when I was a kid. I became very anxious. I became very hypervigilant. I was trying to always get a sense of what does this person think about me? What does that person think about me? Do I look okay? Do I sound okay? Do I act okay? And so, of course, I started acting up in school and I got diagnosed with ADHD. And now I have this doctor, this person of authority, who's now telling my parents that there's something else about me that they shouldn't approve of. In fact, it's very disruptive, and you don't want him to have this thing. But don't worry about it because we're going to medicate him for it. We're going to medicate him for it. It's going to solve that problem. He will not be who he is anymore. This medication is going to make him who he's supposed to be. Just medicate this kid every single day. Again, now let me just say that's not the words the doctor actually
Yeah.
used, but that's the sense of what was happening. And we moved to Austin from Houston right before I started high school. And I was very afraid of getting bullied because I was an awkward kid. I mean, I know freshmen are awkward, but I kind of like set a bar there. Like I was an awkward kid. And that is exactly what happened, unfortunately. In fact, the bullying was so bad that about halfway through my freshman year of high school, when I got dropped off at school, the teachers and the assistant principals would have to get their eyes on me and make sure I made it into school safely.
Wow.
Um,
Crazy.
and so I'll explain what my life felt like at that time. I would wake up every single day into a body that I had been conditioned to believe was not a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. I would find myself in the presence of parents who were loving and supporting, but didn't always feel like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. Then I would go to school every day that physically didn't feel like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. And I lived in the confidence that tomorrow was going to be equally difficult, if not more. Now, that is a breeding ground for depression and anxiety. Right? Depression is a form of grief for your life not being as it should. And anxiety is an alarm bell that's saying you need to try to solve this problem because something about the immediate future does not feel safe, and I can't identify how to solve it. Be anxious, be aware. And I remember that they switched my medication from Ritalin to Adderall at about that time. And as soon as the bullies in the school found out that I took Adderall, all of a sudden they started to act as if they were my friends.
Oh, yeah, they wanted to get hooked up with some of the Adderall.
Exactly. Now, I
Wow.
knew they weren't my friends, but it looked so much like it. It sounded so much like it. And I was so desperately craving a sense of fitting in and safety that I grabbed a hold of that opportunity. And I was that kid. I was the guy that gave all the guys Adderall. And I remember using Adderall for the first time as a recreational drug. And I was hooked immediately because I was a shy, scared, anxious kid who didn't feel like anything made sense to him, anything felt safe. And Adderall made me feel unbelievably confident immediately. With
Wow.
ease and repeatability, I felt confident. With ease and repeatability, I had friends. With ease and repeatability, I was able to lose weight for the first time. I was slightly overweight as a freshman, and I was getting picked on for it. My dad was still making comments. And so as I continued to abuse this medication, my life started to look as if it was going in the right direction. I lost weight. People were treating me well. I felt like I had confidence. My dad, who wasn't aware I was abusing drugs, was seeing his son lose weight,
This,
enjoy going to school,
yeah.
have friends, do well in class. And so now my dad starts treating me like I'm the greatest thing in the world. Oh my gosh, I figured it out, folks. I
Yeah,
figured
that
out
is
how
so
to
funny
do
because I
life.
interviewed somebody else that
Yeah.
got hooked on Adderall, and I
Yeah.
interviewed her in Texas a few months ago, and she's like, I did Adderall, and it's like I had my whole life figured out. I'm like,
That's
but
exactly what
then
it
it
felt
like
like.
ruined her life. But yeah,
By the time I was in college, it was an absolute disaster.
yeah.
Like, could not get enough. Getting more was an ever constant problem. I stopped going to school. I stopped going to hanging out with my friends. I moved back to Texas. I was in school in Georgia. I moved back to Texas. I ended up on the streets buying and selling drugs. I was stealing from people. I was treating my family like garbage. Like, I fell into the absolute cliche of a drug addict. What started as this fun, experimental, convivial thing that turned into this use that I thought it was making me who I was supposed to be, and then it ruined everything. And you couldn't convince me that that was the problem because you don't know how unsafe my life felt before I used it, and you don't know how well it worked once. So I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to get it back to the way it was. You can't convince me this doesn't work. I know how well it works. If I can just get enough, I'll solve this problem. Till the time I was 30 years old, I was 2 weeks away from being homeless. I weighed 350 pounds at the time because I would do 2 weeks of drugs. Then I couldn't get any for like a month, and I would just eat nothing but fast food every day
Oh my
for a
God,
month
thank God you're
straight.
still alive, right?
I know, right? And my family wasn't talking to me. My parents and sister hadn't spoken to me in about a year. My identical twin brother was not living in Austin. He was in Georgia, and we were still talking every day. But that was like the only contact that I had with someone in my family, other than like blaming my parents for everything. And
Mm.
you know, I remember my dad came to me with this opportunity, and believe me, up at this point, until this point, my dad and my mom had every reason to give up on me. And my dad is part of the founding of Whole Foods Market, and at the time Whole Foods was partnering with a guy named Rip Esselstyn. And Rip Esselstyn is the creator of Plant Strong. He's part of the movie Forks Over Knives. His dad is Dr. Cole Esselstyn, Forks Over Knives. And Whole Foods Market was creating these 6 or 7 day immersive retreats with Rip and his team to learn how to eat a whole food plant-based diet in order to help their team members of Whole Foods reverse disease. And my dad begged me to go. And I didn't want to go. I didn't know what a plant-based diet was. I didn't want to know what a plant-based diet was. I didn't know who Rip
Yeah.
was. I didn't want to know who Rip was. I just knew that if I could convince my dad that I wanted to do this thing, I bet I could get him to keep giving me money. Like that was the whole strategy.
Hmm.
And so I went to this retreat with Rip and I listened to everything that was being said. And to be fair, it all made sense. Like this plant-based diet made sense. The nutritional biochemistry made sense. The ethics made sense. It even looked attractive to me. And I wish I could tell you that after 7 days of living a whole food plant-based diet and whole food plant-based lifestyle at this retreat center with Rip, and even seeing some of the effects on myself, that I was able to just leave and change my life. But the reality is that I simply wasn't willing to give up what was allowing me to escape a life that was too painful a place to be on the gamble that this guy's diet might work for me in a year. Like that was so terrifying. I was alone. I didn't have any friends. I barely had any family to talk to. And I wasn't a good family member to talk to myself. Like it was mostly my fault. And so it just got worse. And on August 21st of 2012, it was the worst it had ever been. I had, I was thirsty all the time and urinating all the time for reasons I didn't understand. I had erectile dysfunction for reasons I didn't understand. I had infected cuts on my legs from scratching mosquito bites that wouldn't heal for reasons I didn't understand. And every single day that I was alive was the most painful day of my life. And I lived in full confidence that tomorrow was always going to be much worse. Now, when you live there long enough, tomorrow eventually becomes a place you have no interest in being a part of. And so I tried to end my life by suicide.
Wow.
I remember the experience of it. I remember what it felt like because I did it by intentional overdose. And it was kind of this weird thing. I'd been up for 5 days straight on drugs and there was a whole pile of pills in front of me. And I don't know, I wasn't really conscious or really aware, but I just remember like, I just didn't stop taking the pills. I just kept taking them. And I remember this overwhelming sensation, feeling sick. And I tried to stand up off my couch, and the right side of my body completely cramped. And it felt like I got stabbed in the right side with a hot knife. And I kind of buckled forward, and
Wow.
my vision goes black. That's the last thing I remember of it. But I remember that last moment before I lost consciousness. And I don't know what it feels like to die, but I do know what it feels like to believe that you're dying with a life full of regret. Now, I don't know if death is something you should be afraid of, but I know that is. I know that leaving this life with unbelievable amounts of regret and shame and not having gone for the life that you want, that is worth your fear. And I can remember waking up on the floor of my apartment in a puddle of vomit and a pile of fast food garbage and just having this overwhelming feeling of relief. And I found that to be quite remarkable. I thought, why am I relieved? I didn't want to be here 10 minutes ago or however long it was. Why am I relieved? And the reality is that that relief is only possible if there is something about myself and my life that I loved enough, something about myself and my life that was so important and so meaningful that even though my life was equally as hard as it was the moment before I attempted, I was relieved to still be alive. And so that's when I called my family and I finally asked for help. I checked into a rehab facility where I was diagnosed with advanced type 2 diabetes. My fasting blood glucose was 400. It was 390, but let's just
What?
call it 400.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Um, my A1C was over 12%.
Oh, crazy.
My cholesterol was over 300. My blood pressure was 210 over 130. My resting heart rate was like 115.
Fast
And
food, the fast food
I
life.
know,
Like it's
right?
funny, the fast food life, it destroys your body, it destroys your mind to the point you don't even want to live. So it's like
Yeah.
it's so crazy that it's like shows how addictive it is, you
Yeah.
know?
And I got put on about 12 different medications for the chronic diseases that I had, plus the depression, the anxiety, the ADHD. They diagnosed with a whole host of psychological conditions. And this was the interesting part because sitting across the desk from this doctor, and this doctor says, here's the thing, Adam, you have advanced diabetes. We're going to put you on the highest dose of oral medication, 2,000 milligrams of metformin per day. We're going to do that for the next 30 days while you're here in the rehab facility, but I don't think that's going to work for you. You're likely going to end up going on insulin. You are at risk of losing your eyesight. You are at risk of losing limbs. You are at risk of losing your hearing. All of these things are realities you need to be okay with. We're going to medicate you for it, but there's nothing you can do about it. Adam, you have extremely high cholesterol, over 300. You also have high blood pressure. These are the precursors to cardiovascular disease.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you can do about it. We're going to medicate you for it, but you are looking at potentially having a cardiovascular event in the next 10 years if you don't work really, really hard. You have clinical depression. You have clinical anxiety. You have all these other conditions. There's nothing you can do about it. We're going to medicate you for it. But Adam, listen, if you want your life to get better, you have to stop using drugs. And I remember thinking to myself, that's the worst prescription for change I have ever heard in my entire life. I knew my future didn't look very good. I was well aware that I was not going on a good path. But this doctor painted a picture of a future that was far more terrifying than anything I had imagined. And he said, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, if that's where I'm headed, there's nothing I can do about it. That is a future I want nothing to be, I don't want to be a part of
Yeah.
at all.
Talk about
So what
powerless.
urgency
Yeah.
now do I have to change anything? Why should I care about stopping the drug use if that's where I'm going? I remember thinking to myself, this is not true. I remember hearing people at Rip Esselstyn's retreat saying how so many of these conditions are completely reversible, and that what I need to do is I need to take charge of what is the change that I have, agency over. I told myself I wanted to reverse engineer aliveness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That if I could become the architect of a life that felt like such a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be, the drug use would be no longer necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became radical and fanatical about solving problems. I wanted to understand how can I reverse diabetes? I wanted to understand how can I reverse heart disease? I wanted to understand how could I lose weight? And I wanted to understand how I could do it with ease and repeatability. And I just like dove in. And within 5 months of being in treatment, so I was in a rehab hospital for 37 days, and I moved into a sober living facility where I ended up staying there for 10 months. But within 5 months of my diagnosis, I completely reversed my heart disease, my diabetes, and my erectile dysfunction. Within 10 months, I lost over 100 pounds, and within 1 year, I was off of all of my psych medications.
Amazing. Way to
Yeah,
go. Because way
thank
to
you.
go. If you didn't make all these changes, then who knows, right?
Yeah. And so I've been in continuous recovery for this will be 13 years. And I've lost, I lost at one point 200 pounds when I was doing marathons, and now I'm much more into weightlifting. So I'm
Yeah.
about 175 pounds down, but I don't really care. I just love how I feel. I've been able to do amazing things. I went back to school, studied nutritional biochemistry, worked in the clinical setting in treatment facilities for addiction recovery. I helped start the coaching program for mastering diabetes.
Mhm.
I even ran the very first controlled trial investigating the effects of nutrition on addiction recovery outcomes in treatment facilities. Published that in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine. It was featured in Forbes and Psychology Today. I have the best friends in the world. And when I talk about what recovery looks like for people, I think about it in the sense there's an amazing journalist named Johann Hari who wrote a book called Lost Connections, probably the best book on depression and anxiety I've ever written. And he talks about the disconnections that create depression and anxiety. And so when I think about recovery, you're thinking about a person whose loving and meaningful bonds have been severed. A loving and meaningful bond with themselves, both physically and emotionally, that they want to show up and be present for every single day. A loving and meaningful bond with other people that they want to show up and be present for every single day, with a purpose beyond themselves that they can share within a community of shared respect. They want to show up and be present for every single day. A loving and meaningful bond with the natural world, and with a future that feels safe, makes sense, and that they want to work for every single day. When these bonds are fully connected, there's an urgent desire to be present, and being present requires sobriety. And so when I think about my journey, it wasn't about giving up drugs. It was about reestablishing these loving and meaningful bonds to the point where drug use no longer matters to me. And I think that nutrition played a vital role in that.
Yeah, because you don't even want drugs now, right? Whereas before you probably
Yeah,
thought, oh, I wouldn't want to live without them. But how much
exactly.
better is your life now? How much better is like your
Um,
happiness and your mental health now versus before?
it's kind of hard to believe. It feels like very much like two completely different lifetimes. Like it's hard for me. I can remember that those are things that I did, but it's hard for me to even like connect to the feeling of needing those things because
Mhm.
they're so divorced from my life now. It's so interesting.
How's your relationship with your parents now? They must just,
It's actually quite incredible. My parents never gave up on me. They supported me the entire way through recovery. They never judged me. They never said, why did it take so long? Or we've been, trying to get you to see this for years. In fact, I got to work with my dad a bit before he resigned and retired from job, and that was really meaningful. And
Mhm.
I think about the way that I want to treat myself. Now, when I was at my worst, I did and said horrible things to my parents.
Yeah.
Things that I don't know if I'm ever really going to fully forgive myself for, but what I'm aware of is that they loved me anyways. They never gave up on me. They always said if ever I need anything, they will help me, but they just cannot support my life anymore. And so I think about, man, what it must be like to love someone so unconditionally, what it must feel like. What if I could do that for myself? What if even on the days when things just do not go well, what if I loved myself anyway? And so I like to think that how my parents loved me when I was at my worst is the model for how I practice my self-care today.
Wow,
And
that's so beautiful.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. I love that. Okay. And I feel like you've learned so much about health. Like you know
yes.
so much. And so I love asking people this question, like, what are maybe the two or three greatest lessons or greatest things you've learned about health? Like if you could
Yeah.
only leave three important things behind, or like three great keys that you've learned.
Yeah. So number one, I think that the I think that probably the most important thing about health is that in terms of my ability to change my life was I always believed that it was an act of will, right? This sheer act of determination in order to change your life. And I can understand why it seems like that because almost everyone we know is trying their hardest to get healthier and they just keep trying, right? Very few people that we know actually fully realize and actualize all of their health goals. It's very rare to see. So clearly, there must be something uniquely gifted in that individual. They must have an unbelievable amount of determination and willpower that they could do it when the majority of people don't. That's what I was led to believe.
Hmm.
But it turns out, I'm still very dear friends with a guy named Dr. Doug Lisle. He's the author of the book
He's
called
my
The Five Different.
therapist. He's the best.
Oh,
Yeah.
Doug is
I just
the
had a
best.
call with him 2 days ago. He is
Amazing.
the best.
I remember I was day 5 in sober living and I was having the hardest time. I got up and it's funny in the way that the sober living house worked was you would write a list of things that you wanted because it's basically a halfway house. I was there with like 12 other guys who were all trying to get sober. They're all somewhere between 20 and 40 years old. So you can imagine what the kitchen looked like. I mean, it was nothing but junk food. But
Hmm.
the way that it works is if you wanted something in the kitchen for a week, you wrote out a list of things and they would send someone and they would buy a week's worth of those things for you and stock it in the kitchen with everyone else.
Hmm.
So I was like, all right, I got to do this plant-based diet. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know. Remember, this is 2012. There were no books other
Yeah.
than like Rip's book. And so I didn't have any recipes. I just thought, okay, what did they have at Rip's Retreat? I remember they had oatmeal every morning. They had tons of fruit. Rice and beans were a big staple. Potatoes were a big staple. And so I wrote those things on a list. It was that short. And I gave it to the house manager, whose last name is actually Hamburger, and said, can you get me these foods? And he said, I'll get you a week of this stuff. Are you sure this is enough? And I said, yes. So my official plant-based journey started with a hamburger. And I remember I went out the next day, I opened up the cabinet, and there was my oats sitting next to a box of Fruity Pebbles, and I lost my mind. Like I threw an absolute fit. I couldn't understand why, if I knew what to do to be happy and healthy, why was it so darn difficult to do it? Why, if I knew I needed to go that direction, why did I keep wanting to go this direction? It didn't make sense. Why was it just not a matter of intellect and will? And I remember thinking someone had mentioned, the Pleasure Trap TED Talk. So I go and watch it, and then I watched it again, and I watched it again, and I watched it again. I think I watched it 5 or 6 times in a row. And I've told Doug this so many times that I was in rehab and sober living at that point for nearly 45 days. But after I finished watching his video, that's when my recovery actually began.
Wow.
It completely changed my perception of what behavior change actually is. Because I thought it was whether you were good enough or you were willful enough or whether you wanted it enough. But really, that we had this psychological and motivational architecture that's responding to the environment that we're in. And it's trying to figure out what's the right move to make. And our environment is so shifted away from what is representative of our natural history and our natural behavior that our survival instincts, which does not care about you making it to 90,
Mm-hmm.
your survival only cares about you making it to tomorrow,
True.
is trying to figure out what to do and trying to compel you towards what it believes are the best things, and it can't make sense of this environment. So my goal was not how do I outcompete the wrong environment with enough willpower in order to achieve my goals, but rather how do I make my environment look exactly like my goals? If I can do that, then simply by being in that environment, every outcome I want will encourage itself. Every outcome that I want will happen simply by the nature of living in the right place at the right time. And so I became just overly enthusiastic about understanding evolutionary psychology and designing an environment where the healthy choice was simple, obvious, and repeatable. And that was like kind of step one was stop thinking that I'm the problem. Why is the environment not encouraging the outcome I want easily enough? If I can continue to focus my attention on that specific problem, I will end up doing well. I am not a failure. I'm not weak. I'm not ill-willed. There's nothing wrong with me. I do not have biology and psychology gone wrong. I have my biology and psychology doing exactly what it's supposed to do in an environment gone terribly wrong. So first is get very clear. What do you want your life to look like? What are the foods that that person eats? What are the movements that that person does? Who are the people that they would surround themselves with? What does their entire environment look like? Calorically, socially, physically, and in movement. What does it look like? And then do your best every single day to make your environment look like that life. And if you do that long enough, you're going to start to get the outcomes that that person would get. So that was my first thing of like, obviously, evolutionary psychology and environmental design. The second one is make it simple. Once you know what it is, make it so simple. Listen, if 5 recipes are hard, 20 doesn't make it easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
If five
Yeah.
recipes are hard, then making recipes might be hard for you right now. So stop making recipes and start cooking food. Brown rice, black beans, sweet potatoes, salads, not a casserole or a black bean burger or an elaborate, recipe that takes you 3 hours. Of course, that's going to be frustrating. Start making it so simple and obvious that it's nearly impossible not to do the healing thing. That's number two. And the last one is find yourself a social circle that looks like the life you want. It can be
Mm-hmm.
an incredibly lonely experience to try to do this on your own. And it's incredibly lonely to have to explain your behavior to people over and over and over again. Now,
Yeah.
the people you surround yourself with don't have to look exactly like the life you live, but they have to look enough like it, right? They have to look enough like it that when you do what you do in front of them, they applaud you for it, that when you do what you do in front of them, you give them the opportunity to do life the way they want to, and vice versa. When they do
Mm-hmm.
life in front of you, is an opportunity for you to engage in life the way you want to. Unless you're willing to make that choice, it will always feel lonely and isolating and hard, no matter how many people you're around. So
Hmm.
finding the right social circle. I used to think that wasn't a big factor,
It's
but it
huge.
really is. It's a huge one. It cannot be overstated. So number one is get clear about the life you want. Number two is design a simple environment that looks like that life. And number three is surround yourself with people who look enough like the life you want to live.
I think that's practical, really good advice. And what I love about you is that you haven't been like a victim in your journey. That's why I think you're so successful. You know, it's so easy. A lot of people start getting health problems or they get overweight or things happen. And it's really easy just to blame, right? I blame my parents. I blame this YouTuber because they were doing mukbangs, so I was doing mukbangs, or they told me to
Yeah.
eat this way, I was eating this way. Like they just blame.
Yeah.
And sort of in that way of living, you're never really going to be successful if you don't take accountability. Like you're never really going to make it anywhere, right? So I love how you have like, taken accountability and
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, I really do believe that everybody who's struggling, they're not crazy. Their pain makes sense.
Hmm.
They make sense. They are not psychology and biology gone wrong. They are very likely psychology and biology gone right, environments gone terribly wrong. Socially, emotionally, physically, calorically,
Yeah.
these environments have shifted so far away from what is appropriate for them. And as a result of that, they're getting these unbelievable behavior responses that are just signals that are saying, this is not okay.
So
This
true.
does not feel right. Now, of course, depression can become disordered because the more depressed a person becomes, the more it disorders their ability to care for themselves. But depression, in and of itself, is a reasonable response to life gone wrong. It is
Yeah.
not in itself a
Yeah,
disorder.
exactly. That's like how my conversations with Doug go, or my
Yes.
therapist.
Same thing
And
with addiction.
yeah,
Addiction is not a disorder. It's not psychology gone wrong. It is
no.
psychology trying to defend itself against a stimulus it was never supposed to try to negotiate with.
Yeah, so true. And I think a lot of times if people are depressed or something, a lot of times people are like, "Oh yeah, it's something wrong with you. You need to medicate yourself." And having sessions with Doug really made me realize how much circumstances and environment and things in all those different areas, like having a tribe, having a support system, having this, having that, really do affect you, right? And it's not just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, something's wrong with you." And you said something in a video. I don't know if it was like a quote you said or if you were saying it of somebody else, but I love how you said if there's something about your life that you can change, then you don't have a problem.
Yeah, that's my dad. I was a week into rehab and I tried to leave. I was having a really hard time. I was having a hard time dealing with the fact that I've been diagnosed with all these diseases.
Hmm.
I was having a hard time dealing with the fact that I went from being on zero medications to 12 overnight. Uh, and I was pissed. I went to rehab for all the cliche reasons. I'm going to get 28 days divorced from my substance, and I'm going to go back and I'm just going to use responsibly again. Like that was my stupid plan.
Hmm.
And I called my dad and I said, Dad, I can't do this. I'm going to leave. And he obviously he heard the concern in my voice. He heard I was scared. And he said, Adam, I'm not going to tell you not to leave, but just tell me what's going on. And I shared with him how upset I was that I had to deal with all this. And that's not why I came. I didn't come here to deal with having diabetes and heart disease and erectile dysfunction and all these other things. I came here to stop using drugs for 28 days, and that's it. Like, that's why I was here. And he said, Adam, listen, I can't tell you that you do or do not have the right to feel upset. You absolutely do. It is completely okay for you to be upset about all these things. I also, I'm not there with you, so I don't know how bad any of these conditions are. I can tell from your voice that they are not, that they're very disruptive and they're very difficult for you to deal with. But let me tell you, Adam, you learned at that retreat with Rip Esselstyn that at least half of what you're dealing with right now is completely reversible. It's like, I don't know about the depression and the anxiety. I'm not a psychologist. I can't say anything about that. When it comes to your weight, when it comes to your heart disease, when it comes to the diabetes, when it comes to the erectile dysfunction, these are completely reversible. Adam, if there's something about your life that is painful and you can do something about it, you don't have a problem. Adam, I'm going to tell you something else. If there are things in your life that are difficult, and you can't do anything about it. It's not a problem. It's just the way things are. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that might be the best advice I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah,
If I
that
have a
really
problem
is.
and I
Hmm.
can change it, It's not a problem. It's just a situation that needs to be resolved. If there's something in my life that's difficult and there's nothing I can do about it, that's technically not a problem. That's just how life is. And what I need to do is figure out, how do I have the best life I possibly can if that thing never changes? And I just remember that in that moment, my dad stopped being my adversary and he became my ally. And it was a very, I'll never forget that conversation.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Holy. And wow, okay. And I'm wondering now, because I know you said your sugars were like in the 400s before. I monitor my blood sugar now 24/7. Guys, I had no idea that I was walking around with high blood sugars, even on a healthy lifestyle. I realized this a couple months ago and it was actually causing me some problems. So I only truly realized when I started monitoring my blood sugars myself 24/7. If I went by the A1C and the fasting tests that were done with the doctors, then I would have thought everything was okay, but everything was not okay. So truly getting this NutriSense blood sugar monitor, which I wear 24/7, it is literally the best money I've ever spent and the best thing I've ever learned about health. I've learned so much about blood sugars, which I can't wait to share with you guys in upcoming episodes. And through seeing things that spike me, that absolutely shock me, now I'm able to alter how I eat in the day. I move more. I go for a walk after I eat. I don't overeat. I don't eat too late. All these habits and just seeing how my blood sugars are moving have transformed my life like nothing else. Diabetes is one of the biggest health concerns facing the planet today, and we want to prevent you from having diabetes, which can lead to so many problems like stroke, heart attack, kidney problems, liver problems, blindness, all these things we do not want to experience. On this channel, we want to live our best life. So blood sugars and elevated blood sugars over a long period of time can be very harmful. So I do recommend you guys pick one of these up today. And what I love about this company is they have a special blood sugar expert, a nutritionist that you can meet with to go over your chart. So you plug everything in and then you can meet with them at a time frame when you want, and they will tell you what's going on. And they've given me so much insane information. So I could go on and on, but we need to get back to this podcast. So I will put this down below. Pick one up. I'll give you guys a code. You can save $50. So support your girl, keep these podcasts going, and do something healthy for yourself today. So this morning when I woke up, it was 76, and I did have some issues, which I don't know if those videos are out by now. I'll put them down below, but if not, stay tuned for that. But what mine weren't
Yeah.
always that way. Some things were going on, but what are your sugars now? Like you're fasting?
Yeah, so I actually don't test my blood glucose anymore. I just get my annual labs every year. So when I
Yeah.
was in rehab, I was obviously testing my blood glucose 2 times a day, every day. My blood glucose went from 390 to under 200 in 2 weeks, which was remarkable.
Wow. Hey.
And that was really kind of the thing that was super encouraging. Like, okay, this seems to be the right thing to do. I should just keep running this 2 week experiment.
Yeah.
Like, let's just do exactly what I did over the last 2 weeks. I'll just do it again. Funny enough, I ended up eating the same meals every single day for 10 months
Yeah.
because I became so fascinated with the way the results were happening. And I really started to figure out, like, I really wanted to understand the science of insulin resistance. Like,
Mhm.
what is actually happening? Because I figure, like, if I can understand what's actually causing insulin resistance, not how do I get my blood sugar down? That's what most people who have diabetes are obsessed with. They want to have lower blood sugar. Well, there's a lot of ways you can get lower blood glucose levels that aren't valuable to your long-term health.
True.
You
Hmm.
could eat nothing but butter and bacon for a
Hmm.
day and have low blood glucose, but you're going to become very insulin resistant as a result of that. And it certainly isn't a strategy for long-term health. We can all agree on that.
Hmm.
You can just not eat. Sure, fasting is a great way, but eventually you're going to have to start eating again. So that's not a very good strategy. So if you think about what's the right question to ask, the right question to ask is, why can my body no longer metabolize carbohydrate energy? If
Hmm.
I can answer that question, I'll solve this problem. And I really got into figuring this out. And what it turns out is that insulin resistance is an excess energy problem. That's what it is. And when you look within that energy, the biggest insulting energy format for insulin resistance is saturated fat. And I can explain this to you really quickly. So when a person is consuming the standard Western diet that is high
Hmm.
in saturated fats, these saturated fats are a triglyceride. And
Hmm.
a triglyceride is a glycerol backbone with one, two, three fatty acids attached to it. That's why it's called a triglyceride. Right. So when you consume these saturated fats and these triglycerides enter your digestive system, a very interesting particle is created. It's called a chylomicron particle. And a chylomicron particle is a lipid transport particle. That's its purpose. As soon as these fatty acids, these triglycerides enter your digestive tract, these chylomicrons are going to swoop in and grab them, and they're going to start distributing them to tissue all over the body. And the reason why this happens is fat is your body's savings account.
Mm-hmm.
It is there to be used when there is no energy or little energy available to you. Carbohydrate energy is your body's checking account. It's to be used as soon as it comes in. Your body wants to transport it to cells, use it as energy. And it's also very abundant in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Fat is actually very scarce in nature. Even actual meat in nature is only about 18% fat. That's actually quite a low fat food. And so you have to have some kind of mechanism that ensures that when fat enters your body, it can get stored into your cells uncontrolled and unregulated. So these chylomicron particles pick up these triglycerides, they take them to your muscle cells, your liver cells, your kidney cells, and they transport them as free fatty acids without communicating with your insulin receptors. They do not need to communicate whatsoever. They can be transported right inside of the cell and stored in a storage format called a lipid droplet. So your cells store two kinds of energy: carbohydrate energy in the form of glycogen in something called a glycogen granule,
Mm-hmm.
and fat energy in a lipid droplet, right? And so your cells prefer this: a big glycogen granule and a small lipid droplet. This is what it likes. But as this person continues to eat the Western diet, over the course of time, this starts to happen. And this lipid droplet gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of time. And eventually, there's too much energy inside of the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, taking on any new energy will be damaging to the health of the cell. And this is where, for the first time ever, the IRS actually tries to save your life. Because inside of your cells, you have these molecules called insulin receptor substrate molecules. IRS molecules.
Mm-hmm.
And their job is to account for the kind of energy in the cell. Is it being used? And is there a problem, or is it working fine? And they go, we have a problem here. That lipid droplet is not going to shrink. It's continuing to grow. We have to stop energy from coming into the cell. So they walk up to the insulin receptors that sit on the outside of the cell, and they instruct these insulin receptors to stop communicating with insulin. They walk up to these insulin receptors and go, hey, listen, insulin receptors, come here. I'm going to talk to you. Do you see what's going on in the cell?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the size of this lipid droplet? Here's what I need you to do. If insulin, which is the body's most powerful energy transport hormone, if it comes around wanting to deliver any energy, you need to tell them that you're closed for business and go somewhere else. Do you understand? The insulin receptor says, yeah, sure, no problem. We can do that. You're the boss. So now this person eats anything rich in carbohydrate, even if it's brown rice. It doesn't matter. In this state, when they eat carbohydrate energy, that carbohydrate enters the bloodstream as glucose. Insulin is produced from the pancreas. These insulin hormones grab a glucose molecule, walk up to the cell of your muscles and go, knock, knock, I have glucose. Do you want to take it up? And the insulin receptors say, sorry, close for business, go somewhere else. And the insulin hormone actually has about 3.5 hours to try to deliver this glucose. It lives about 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
So now it goes to your liver cell. Now it goes to your kidney cell. Now it goes to your brain. Now it goes to your vasculature, your heart. Everywhere it goes, close for business, go somewhere else. And after about 3.5 hours, this insulin hormone dies and the glucose is just left in the blood. And this glucose accumulates over and over and over again until eventually this person becomes symptomatic. They go to their doctor and they're diagnosed with either prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. The reason why they cannot metabolize carbohydrate energy is not because they're eating carbohydrate. It's because within those cells, that lipid droplet has grown so uncontrolled that the cells can no longer accommodate any energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excess energy problem and an excess saturated fat problem. Once I understood that, I just figured, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to eat a lower fat, fiber-rich, whole plant-based diet, and I'm going to eat in an energy balance that allows me to lose weight. If I do those two things, I will solve this problem. And that's exactly what happened. I made it so simple and repeatable and obvious. And I didn't say, I'm this person who has genetic diabetes. Yes, clearly, I have genes that like to build fat within the cells really quickly. That's obvious. However, that only happens if the environment allows me to make the wrong choice too often. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so what were you eating? Like you said too, you ate the same thing for like those 10 months and like you
Yeah.
reversed things quite quickly. So like what did a typical day look like and like what were some do's and don'ts for you in reversing this blood sugar problem?
Yeah, so every morning was oatmeal with cinnamon on top and a sprinkle of sea salt and a side of fruit, like bananas, apples, whatever we had. Um, Lunch was a rice and bean bowl. So I did a cup of rice, cup of beans, and then I just had bags of frozen like mixed veggies that I would like microwave and throw on top of it. And then I put marinara sauce or salsa on top of it. And I had that every day for lunch. And then every day for dinner was a medium-sized like microwave potato, and I put lentils or beans on top of it, and I put some of those frozen veggies on top that I would heat up, and I put a sauce on it, and that was it. I would snack on fruit during the day, and I just ate those meals at the same times every single day. It was so repeatable, so obvious, so simple that like even if I was tempted to make a choice that didn't look like the life I wanted, which happened almost every day, it was so easy for me to say, Adam, you're allowed to have whatever you want, but first, we're going to make this really simple, healthy meal that looks like the life we want.
Hmm.
But first, not that I'm not allowed. I told myself this is not an abstinence game. I'm allowed to have anything I want. What I want most is to have my choices look like the life I want.
Hmm.
Sure, in the moment, like there's that great quote that says, discipline is a choice between what you want now and what you want most. And so asking yourself, am I going to be okay in an hour having not made the right decision first? And I'm going to say to myself, I know what that moment's going to feel like.
Hmm.
I know what the regret is going to feel like. I know that this is not a choice that it may not be easy, but it's simple. And this is a simple thing to do. It may not be easy to do it right now, but I've got this. And so it gave me permission to say, I can do this first. Then after that, I'm allowed to do whatever I want. And giving myself permission a choice for whatever I wanted after I made the healthy choice made it so easy for me to get into action. And after doing the healthy thing, I felt so good about myself that I would usually reward myself by going, great, now I'm going to go for a walk. It
Mm.
really
Yeah.
ever ended up me being like, okay, now I'm gonna have a handful of chips. Like
Mm.
that happened like a couple times a month, but like most of the time, just doing the healing thing was so rewarding. But I never said I have to do this because I'm not allowed to do anything else.
Yeah, I like that.
You
And
know?
the walk, like the movement, that's what I've learned lately and like my like real interest in blood sugars and stuff is the impact movement has on our blood
So
sugars, not
important.
only because a lot of things, right? Our cortisol, our stress, our happiness, our mood, our creativity, but our blood sugars. Because now that I check my blood sugars all the time, I
Mhm.
notice a huge difference. Say I eat something and I'm like, oh, it's creeping up more than usual. I see like we're quickly going like 126, 136. I go for a walk, it's like back down. And every time I track, like when I go for a walk or get some exercise, down like 20, 30, 40
Yeah.
points.
People, so when I was part of Mastering Diabetes, I was their food addiction and insulin resistance coach.
Yeah.
And it's fun. I think back by the days when it was me and Kylie, who's Cyrus's wife, we were like designing all the group coaching programs. It was brand new. It's a lot of fun. But one of the most accessible things that everybody can do right now to change their blood glucose health is after you eat, just go for a 10 to 15-minute walk. That's all you have to do. What happens when you do this is you have this really interesting mechanism called a GLUT4 transporter. Now, a GLUT4 transporter is a glucose transport particle that helps you metabolize glucose energy independent of insulin when you're exercising. So remember, when you get into exercise, your body doesn't go, "Oh, we're trying to burn calories." Your body goes, "Hang on, there might be something we need energy for that's going on. I don't know if we're building something important. I don't know if we're running from something. I don't know if we're doing something important, but it seems like energy is really needed right now. So let's not rely solely on insulin. Let's activate this GLUT4 transporter that allows us to metabolize carbohydrate energy in addition to insulin. And so when you go for a walk, your body can now have two mechanisms of getting glucose from your blood into your muscle cells. This is really valuable because everybody can take advantage of this right now. The other interesting thing is the impact that actually getting and adding lean muscle has to your glucose health. So As you start to exercise, you're going to start to build more lean muscle. That's not necessarily bigger muscles, but more lean muscle. As you do this, that muscle now requires more energy per second to maintain its new level of fitness, right? This new lean muscle requires energy or it just goes away. So, in order to facilitate this, the cells of that muscle tissue build additional insulin receptor sites and additional mitochondria, something called mitochondrial biogenesis
Wow.
inside of the cell. So now your cells can vacuum up and metabolize more energy per second 24 hours a day permanently.
Wow. There's so
Yeah.
much to learn. I am so interested in this topic because I truly now believe that chronic elevated blood sugars is the main cause of a lot of the health problems facing the world
It,
today, right?
it is
And a lot of people are walking around with elevated blood sugars or blood sugar problems and they have no idea, which I was one of them. Like, it's crazy.
predicted that a million plus people right now are walking around with undiagnosed prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. A million. And even those who don't, even those who are technically in that insulin sensitive, healthy blood glucose level, they're the choices that they make are making blood glucose variability problems where they have these hypos that happen after they go really high for a second. And it's like their blood glucose may go up. It may not stay elevated, but it
Yeah.
spikes and it comes back down quickly. And anytime you have a sharp drop in blood glucose, even if you don't go low, you can feel like you're having a low. It's an event called a phantom hypoglycemic event where you're not technically hypoglycemic, but your blood glucose drops so fast, so quickly that it feels like you're having one. And this can cause you to feel fatigued, brain fog, angry. Like there's so many things that can
Yeah,
occur.
this is another thing I think there's a huge connection, right, to blood sugar problems and mood swings.
Irritability is a major signal of blood glucose issues. Having high blood glucose can make you irritable. Having low blood glucose can make you irritable. And swinging back and forth quickly can make you irritable. So having healthy postprandial curves and healthy blood glucose curves when you're not in a when you're in a fasting state, it's very mood regulating. And
Mm.
so it can really change your life.
So how can we avoid the swinging? Like, how can we live a stable life? Any advice for that? Like your
Yeah.
top tips?
The number one thing you can do is you can follow these four themes in terms of your diet. Number one, eat a diet rich in fiber and fiber from whole foods. Number two, right? This is really important. Eat a diet low in saturated fat. Okay. You don't have to not eat nuts and seeds and avocados, but you really want to stay away from the butter, from the cheese, from the fatty meats. These are uniquely insulting to your insulin sensitivity. And remember, being insulin resistant isn't just diabetes. Insulin resistance of the liver is fatty liver disease. Insulin resistance of the kidney is chronic kidney disease. Insulin resistance of the heart is cardiovascular disease. Insulin resistance of the vasculature is sorry, of the heart is coronary artery disease. Of the vasculature is cardiovascular disease. Insulin resistance of the brain impacts dementia and Alzheimer's. So insulin resistance is an engine that drives all of these metabolic conditions. So you want to eat a diet that is high in fiber, low in saturated fat, a diet that prioritizes plant protein over animal protein. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm not telling everybody on the planet that they have to be vegan. Okay, I would love it if people did decide to go vegan if it works for them, but we need to start doing something really important. 70% of the protein that people consume in Western society comes from animal products and only 30 from plants. We should start by at least flipping that.
Mhm.
It would be great if you can get it closer to 90, 95%, but let's start by at least making the priority for protein in your diet coming from plants. And the last is the removal of ultra processed foods.
Mm.
If you
Yeah.
follow those four themes, your dietary quality is going to increase significantly. In addition to those things, movement matters. All right. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily exercising. It just means being in movement more. We are way too sedentary as a culture. We need to be in movement. We need to stop sitting around all day. If you can get over here, I have a bike desk. You can see. So
Mhm.
I work from my laptop almost all day long, but I prioritize movement. I
Good.
keep my body moving. We need to get into rhythm with nature. Your
Mm.
circadian rhythm really matters.
Yeah.
When we wake up, try not to do this first. Try to go outside and spend the first 15 minutes of your day getting actual natural light.
Mm.
Let yourself get this signal that comes through your eyes. The color temperature of sunrise is uniquely different than the color temperature of the sky during the rest of the day. And when this red light comes through your eyes, it is a signal that tells your body in 15 hours, produce melatonin. In 15 hours, it is going to be dark again, and we need to make sure that we're going to produce melatonin. So 15 hours from that point, what you want to do is you want to encourage your environment to become dark. Turn your overhead lights off.
Mhm.
Use incandescent bulbs that mimic the color of sunrise and sunset. Introduce the natural rhythm of nature to your nervous system. Let your body wake with the day and calm with the night and reinstill your circadian rhythm. And the last thing is social health.
Yeah,
You
and
need to
because
have
stress, right? That can affect our sugars, right?
at least three friends that you know that if you called on them for anything, they'll answer the phone.
Mm.
Because these are the people that if you're having a tough day, you can call them and talk to them about it, or you can ask them to come over, or you can go over there. Not doing life alone is unbelievably important. Just
Mm.
as bees have evolved to need a hive, human beings have evolved to need a tribe. We need our tribe, and our tribe needs to look like the life we want to live in order to feel safe. So, those are the things that you can do to encourage your blood glucose health.
I love that. That's great advice. And what about the order in which we eat things for our glucose health? Like I've heard, say somebody's having a vegan meal and they have a salad, sweet potato, beans, and some tofu. Like I've heard it's best you start with the salad, then the
Yeah.
protein, then the beans, and you eat the sweet potato last. I've seen a lot of videos where people show doing it in the other order and maybe starting with the sweet potato and their sugars go up, whereas they wouldn't have. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I would advise you to stop watching those videos because what matters most is the quality of your dietary pattern. Remember, we don't know, this isn't, when you see that, what you're looking at is something called an N of one experiment. An N of one experiment is also called an anecdote.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know what else is going on in this person's life. We don't know their current metabolic health. We don't know the choice they made for the meal before that meal because that
Yeah.
impacts it. We
Yeah.
don't know what time of day it was. We don't know anything else about this individual. All we're seeing is that for that person, when they ate the meal, their blood glucose rose higher when they had it ordered one way versus the other. But they're also not telling you, did the rise in blood glucose for either of those orders matter?
Mm-hmm.
Did it ever go into an unhealthy range? Did it ever cause problems for them later? These are clickbait, and they are content alone, and they are absent of context,
Okay.
and that will create a lot of confusion for you.
Okay. And one
Yeah.
other thing I want to ask you about is matcha. I don't know your thoughts on matcha, but I bring this up because I'm currently going through a big matcha green tea
Yeah.
phase. And I was talking to a blood sugar analyst. Like they're a
Sure.
nutritionist. All they do is analyze blood sugars the other day. And they said something interesting because I know you mentioned the ADD and the Ritalin too.
Yeah.
They said that there's been studies that show, and I don't know if this is true, you guys, but they said that there's been studies that show that matcha is just as or more effective at treating ADHD than Ritalin. And so people are saying like it's a great natural substitute because it makes you focus and stuff. And they also said, which I thought was interesting, is matcha is one thing that will almost always never raise or spike your blood sugar. So do you have any thoughts on matcha? Do you think it's healthy or do you think it should be cut
So
stimulant?
my wife is Dr. Laura Gouge. Definitely recommend checking her out on Instagram. She's got an amazing platform where she actually talks about neuroatypical brain health, things like ADHD and focus, as well as things like mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance.
Mm-hmm.
She's a huge fan of matcha.
Good, me
And
too. I
one of
should
the
have
things
her
that
on.
she talked about, I haven't seen the studies on matcha and ADHD, but I have seen the studies of using things like saffron.
Hmm.
The herb saffron has been shown in clinical trials to be almost as effective as Ritalin on ADHD, which is really interesting.
Wow, so interesting, so fascinating. Well, I could ask you things all day. Okay, one other thing, not sure if you know anything on it, but alpha lipoic acid. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on people taking that as like an antioxidant to add in for like maybe treating, diabetes or just adding in for their health? Because I know some people take that for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really looked into the studies on that, but what I would say for everybody is before you start to do all the novel things,
Hmm.
it really is the basic routine of life that has the biggest impact on your blood glucose health. It isn't the fancy tech. It's not the cold plunge. It's not the sauna. It's not the red light. It isn't all of the other supplements that you're going to take. Those things are great, and I love them. And I actually, we do them here. We have a sauna, a cold plunge. We have red light panels. I take, strategic supplements that for my health. But what I'll tell you is, if you don't first address the foundations, which is what you eat, who you eat with, how you move, what you drink, how you sleep, and how you wake up. If you don't do those things first, all of those other expensive gadgets
Hmm.
are just pretty things that you're putting on top of a toxic environment.
True.
And
Good
so
advice.
let's focus on the foundations first. And then if things aren't changing, then you start to explore the other strategic things that are more, kind of
Yeah.
clickbait. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. And anything to end off with, any advice for anybody out there watching who might be in a low spot or not where they want to be, not happy or healthy, or just anything you feel called to share? And then let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of a quote that says, "If your life isn't as it should, isn't going as it should be, try telling the truth. Whatever happens to you as a result of telling the truth is the best thing that could possibly happen, regardless of how it looks to you right now." That is just so well put and so well phrased, and I know how difficult that can be. Trust me, I know how hard it is to be honest with yourself and honest with people, because I know what it was like when my life was at its worst. And people would say, if you had such a loving family, why did you not reach out to them? Why did you try to end your life? And I can phrase it this way. I was afraid that if I told the truth, if I showed my family all of me, they might not love me anymore. And the experience of feeling that was something I wasn't willing to tolerate. And unfortunately, because of my inability to tell the truth to my family, I made a decision that could have possibly ended my life. If I had told the truth, I could have spared myself that experience, because they were waiting for me to tell them the truth. They were waiting for me. They were waiting to love me bigger than I've ever been loved in my entire life, if I could just tell the truth. If you're in this place, find somebody that you know can listen to you. I'll say it like this. If you're struggling, if you know someone who's struggling, I want you to call this person and I want you to say to them, I love you. I love you whether you're using or you're not. I love you whatever state you're in. And if you need me, I don't know what to do, but I will listen to you. And I might be able to help you figure out who is the right person to talk to. I can't solve this problem for you, but I can solve it with you. Reminding somebody that they matter, reminding them that there's a place within their community of love and shared respect that is saved just for them, and that you have been waiting for them, is so unbelievably impactful. It reminds them that they are more than their problems. And if they are willing to go over this really, really difficult hill, and I know how difficult this hill is, I know what it looks like, but if you are, there is a place on the other side of the hill that includes everything you've ever wanted. And so I urge you to just do the really terrifying thing of telling the truth and just see how the world responds to you. I know there are people out there that will respond to you with love and kindness. Try to find that person.
Wow, that was so beautiful. Do you have a TED Talk? Because you should if you don't already. You're such a good speaker. That was
uh, I'm
amazing.
I'm working on a TED Talk.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
job. Well, this has been such an inspiring conversation. So thank you for sharing and thank you for
my
everything.
pleasure.
And where can everybody find you? And I'll link everything down below.
Yeah, just I have a website, adamsud.com. You can find me there. I do one-on-one consulting, very similar to like what Doug Lyle does, coaching people on behavior change and understanding why it is that they feel like things aren't going well. I
Wow.
think the biggest issue with change is that you have to first make it make sense, right? You have to make sense of why it's hard. Because once it makes sense, then you can organize around it. I also do public speaking, so you can find a way to reach out to me for that as well on my website.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Well, this has been great. I've appreciated you coming on. Thank you for sharing. Everybody, give this a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe. I'll put a great video on the screen for you guys to watch right now, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Thank you.